PC building market has gone totally crazy with new product releases basically every week. And this time it's Intel's turn with their new 13th gen processor lineup. Have they managed to dethrone AMD already? A matter of weeks after their new Ryzen 7000 launch? I guess there's only really one way to find out. In this video, we'll be testing these new chips by building the ultimate 13th gen gaming PC with a 4090, Z790 motherboard, and just about everything in between. Let's do this. Ebuyer.com are your one-stop shop for all your PC hardware needs over in the UK, with loads of deals on a wide range of components, including new GPUs and these new Intel 13th gen processors. There's loads to choose from. You can supercharge your setup with some new peripherals, or grab yourself a new PC from their in-house system builder AlphaSync. Check out all the latest tech deals at the first link below. Intel's new Raptor Lake 13th gen lineup excites me for a number of reasons, and should probably excite you too. With 14, 16 or 24 cores on the i5, i7 or i9 chips in that order, and a boost clock speed on the 13900K of 5.8 GHz out of the box, these things look to tick a lot of the single and multi-threaded performance boxes. If you take a look at how these compare to the Ryzen processors, you can see how these chips might be a lot better, not only for multi-threaded performance, but single thread too. And it doesn't stop there. These new Raptor Lake processors support Z690 motherboards with a BIOS update, or new Z790 designs. They also support DDR4 or DDR5 memory, saving a mid-range and budget builder a lot of money, and do so at MSRP price points that look very attractive. Now, we received the press kit, which looks like a CPU under a microscope, which is pretty cool. And in here, there's a couple of pretty exciting chips that we've got our hands on. Specifically, the i9 13900K and the i5 12600K. We've also got in for good measure the i7 13700K, which you'll see in some of our graphs a bit later. A couple of technical bits of information. These CPUs retain Intel's P and E core tech, which they pioneered with 12th gen. Basically, your performance cores are the faster cores, and you've also got efficiency cores in there too, which are automatically load balanced to deal with background tasks. That essentially allows some cores to be stronger, be better for gaming, but gives you the upside that multi-threaded performance obviously has on more cores. That's the main reason why you'll see a much higher core count on these CPUs than you will on the new Ryzen 7000 lineup, and a reason as well that the performance on these is set to be a good chunk better. With your P cores here running up to 5.8 GHz on the i9 13900K, with up to 5.4 GHz on the i7 and 5.1 on the i5, these are certainly not slow chips, but neither was Ryzen 7000, so we'll dive into that later in a little more detail. I'm going to select the i9 for this build, as the whole idea is that I want to build the best PC I can put together for an unlimited budget. Now, for the motherboard, I've picked the Asus ROG Maximus Z790 Hero. For a long time, I've been a fan of their Maximus range. It gives you all the bells and whistles you could want. PCIe Gen 5 for your storage and your GPU slot. You've also got DDR5 memory support, the LGA 1700 socket for 12th and 13th gen processors. I could bang on about it all day, but I don't need to, because I've actually done a review, or one of our team has, I should say, over on the website, which I'll pop in the cards now. Give it a read if you want to learn the technical ins and outs of the Maximus Hero. There really is nothing more exciting than opening a brand new CPU. Here we are. Oh, look at that. Would you just look at that CPU? Oh, yes. Now, of course, nothing new here. AMD have gone for a whole new approach with their AM5 CPUs, where they've basically done what Intel have been doing for years. Intel haven't really changed much, so you can basically go ahead and just pop the CPU in like you always have done. Triangle in the corner, match it all up, very gently, as the pins can be delicate. Give it a bit of a wiggle, arm down, retention arm down, plastic cover off. Basically all we need to do. I'm going to put my RAM in next. I've got 32 gigs of Corsair's Vengeance RGB DDR5. This is nearly 6,000 megahertz in speed as well. DDR5 is one of those things, it's just not there yet. It's something that lets the Ryzen 7000 architecture down, especially on the budget end. For a high-end build like this, you might as well go for high-end memory, but for a cheaper build with like the i5, for example, just pick yourself up a Z690 DDR4 motherboard, or even a B660 chipset. Save yourself some cash with cheaper motherboards and cheaper memory. This board supports 4 DIMMs, which is pretty normal. Your Maximus Hero kind of gives you all the functionality that you could want and clips in nice and easily. While we're here, we can also go ahead and remove this M.2 heatsink just here. So we've got 2 screws, which will pull this off, revealing the toolless M.2 installation mechanism. Now, I've picked a pretty exciting drive for this build, one you probably haven't heard of before. It's Samsung's new 990 Pro, not the 980, the 990. Now, it gives you read speeds of 7.5 gigabytes a second, which is basically as quick as you get, I think, for a Gen 4 drive. The writes are slightly slower, but still just under 7 gigabytes a second, so very good. This one's 2 terabytes, but you can get a 1, a 2, or a 4, so plenty of choice. Make sure to remove the little M.2 sticky pad peely thing, is definitely what it's called, and pop the drive in. Cover goes back on, that'll keep it in place, nothing more to it. Wait, did the old one not have plastic in it?
Yeah, the old one had like a recycled cardboard.
Bad news, Samsung. The old one, better packaging for the planet. Look after the planet, Samsung. We don't need this plastic rubbish. You know what? I don't want to blow my own trumpet, toot my own horn, but that's looking very good so far. Now, there is one thing I'd recommend anyone do if they're using a particularly complicated CPU cooler or a liquid cooler, and that's just prep some of the mounting hardware for the motherboard now before we go ahead and move it into the case. Now, I have got an admission to make. I try to be an organised chap, but sometimes it doesn't go quite to plan, and all of our CPU mounting hardware gets a little muddled. Introducing this, the NZXT box. NZXT mounting hardware is very standard, so the stuff that we use will be the exact same things you're going to use if you go in for the same approximate parts. Success. Great success. What you'll find is one of these. This is like a flexible plastic backplate with 4 screw pins on each corner that actually adjust as you see fit. And then we've also got these sort of male-to-male posts with a thumb screw on the top. These are what we're going to use to actually fasten the cooler down a bit later. Add in the backplate and then screw in these male-to-male posts. Keep a hold of these thumb screws, as I say, we'll need those in a few moments' time. But doing this stage will save you a lot of hassle later. I've done so many builds where I've forgotten to do it, regretted it. It can be very fiddly inside of a case. So get it done now, top right, and then the 2 at the bottom. For the case in this build, I just need to move the 1490 out of the way, carefully does it, and place down this, our NZXT H7. Now, you've got to be a bit careful when using the new graphics cards and the new components in existing cases. This is a normal ATX motherboard, but lots of our X670 boards we saw were eATX, so big boys. Same goes for the graphics card. I mean, this is like 360 something mil, but some of the cards from like Gigabyte, Asus, MSI, Palette are like 380 mil, closer to 400 mil. So really check these dimensions. It's important you get these right. I don't want you guys buying a case, trying to get your GPU in and then go, no, it doesn't fit. And that's because this new hardware is bigger as well as better and more expensive. Although 13th gen looks to be a bit of an outlier and hopefully is nice and competitively priced, which is good to see. Now with any build, you want to strip down all of the panels of the case, so the top, both the sides and the rear. Shout out to NZXT, by the way, for making it totally toolless. You literally haven't got a single screw. Very easy, very well designed. And then we can lay the chassis down nice and flat. I mean, you can do this upright if you want to make your life difficult, but I would suggest not making your life difficult and laying the case down flat. Taking a look in the chassis and pulling out my pointy screwdriver of doom, you'll be able to see that we've got some standoffs in here. Now, we've got 3 at the top, there's 3 down the middle, and 3 along the bottom. No extras. That's important because they're going to line up perfectly with the standard ATX form factor that you'll find on this motherboard and most modern ATX motherboard designs. Taking a quick cursory glance, you'll see 3 down the middle, 3 down the bottom, 3 up the top, so they're all going to line up nice and easily. And the board also has this fancy thing called a built-in rear I/O shield, meaning we can simply drop it into place. All the standoffs line up because we've checked it. The I/O shield doesn't need installing beforehand. And then, in theory, they all should just line up and we can pop some screws in to tighten it down. Try not to miss any out. I mean, you don't have to necessarily do all 9, but it's probably for the best if you just go ahead and do all 9. At this stage then, I can go ahead next up and add the cooler in. Picking a cooler for these new CPUs is actually quite important. Looking at the specs, this 12, 13, I keep saying 12. One day I'll get into my head that it's not Ryzen 5000, it's 7000, and it's not 12th gen, it's 13th. These 13900K chips can run warmer. I mean, the peak power consumption is like 225 watts on this, so having something capable of dispersing all the heat, and of course allowing us to overclock on this motherboard to over 6 gigahertz, that's the first thing I think I'm going to do when I boot this PC up, is important. And that's where NZXT's Kraken X73 comes in. Large radiator, 3 RGB fans, and it's going to fit perfectly in the front of the case. Oopsie.
It's going to fit perfectly
in the front of the case. I'm going to add those in, pop the block on top, and that's where those thumb screws come in from earlier. You want to go ahead and place these on all four corners of the CPU and just give them a nice tighten in a cross pattern, which will fasten our cooler into place. I actually had to place it with the tubes on the right hand side as they don't fit on the left. There's too much heatsink on our VRMs, which is a good sign for overclocking, but something to think about if you've got a bulky air cooler. This motherboard is maybe better suited to an all-in-one like this one, where you can choose the side that the tubes are on. Now then, while the chassis is down here, I think it makes sense to pop in the GPU next. Now, when you're looking at a build like this, there really is only one choice if you want to build the highest end, most powerful gaming PC that one can possibly put together, and that is, of course, the RTX 4090. Here it is. Hallelujah. Oh, it's the wrong way around. Here it is. Oh.
Don't do that again.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that again. Now, this is NVIDIA's most powerful graphics card ever, and it weighs an absolute ton. Now, for this build, you've got a few options. You could go for like a GeekaWhat card, an MSI, or an Asus to match the motherboard, but you've got to be really careful of the size. The Founders Edition card, which is this one here, just a quick reminder, 24 gigs of VRAM, 2.5 gigahertz clock speed, DLSS 3. I mean, this thing is the business. Costs you a lot of money, but it's very, very powerful. It's one of the smaller cards on the market, believe it or not, meaning it fits into this build absolutely fine. But you've only probably got another 4.5-5 centimeters to play with, about 40 millimeters. So just be wary of the GPU you're going to go for and the case that it fits in. These cards are big, triple slot beasts, so make sure your case not only fits them, but that they look good and well proportioned inside the chassis you've selected. With this being a large, thick triple slot card, we also need to just take out this rearmost PCI lane. Removing that's going to give us, of course, the all-important clearance we need for the 1490. Oh yeah, baby. Pop this thing in. Oh, I'm excited. And then if we push it in, we get a nice satisfying click sound, and we can fasten it down through each of the three holes. One here, and one here. This card is like a unibody S design, meaning it doesn't really sag that much, which is good. But just be wary, some of the big aftermarket cards, you may want to add in a support bracket, not only to keep it upright and looking good, but to prevent damage to your PCI slot and other components in the build. I talked about it extensively in our 4090 review and build videos, but the 4090, as much as it's a great card, it's a card that I would also recommend you think twice before buying. Do you actually need the power of a GPU like this? Of course, I want to build myself the fastest PC possible, but do you really need 200 frames per second at 4K? And more importantly, have you got a really expensive monitor that can best make advantage of a card like this? Or instead, would you be better with the upcoming 4080, which I'm also presuming will be very good, and then spending the spare cash on upgrading other elements of your setup and other parts of your gaming experience? For the price of a 4090, you could build the sickest sim setup in the world and have a PC to power it. So it's definitely food for thought on that front. Talking of needed other components to work with the 4090, not only do you need a fast CPU, introducing that 13th gen, but also a good power supply. 450 watts for the GPU, 250 for the CPU, and we got 700 watts already on 2 components. So make sure you have a good power supply, which is where's it gone? I keep losing power supplies recently. It's so heavy. The Corsair HX1000i comes into play. Now, fully modular, only plug-in cables you need. I mean, for like $200, $300, I should bloody hope so. It's also got a PCI Gen 5 power cable for our graphics card, meaning we haven't got that horrible splitter to use. I mean, have you seen the size of this splitter? Not for me. And of course, it also has software control with a USB-C port to Corsair iCUE, because I mean, of course it does. Actually, kind of useful for monitoring power usage, something that some people will be worried about on these new components, but I assure you, 1000 watts for this build will be more than enough. The GPU is 450 at peak. It's not running at that all the time. Same with the CPU. I won't run through all the detailed cables and wiring, but I have covered that before. Instead, I'll let you watch me manage this PC and make it look stunning. I'm also going to pop in a couple of custom sleeve cable extensions in there too, for good measure, just to polish it all off. And then I think we're going to be good to actually turn this thing on. Oh, heavy, really, really heavy for the very first time. Before that, we need to pop all these side panels back into place. Let's start by adding on the top panel first of all. Editor Dan just went, ah! Bit difficult doing it blind. We'll leave the glass one off for now. You'll see why in a second. And then the back one is, I mean, sort of on, but I think our cables need a bit more work in order for that to stay exactly in its place. And then we can plug up our keyboard, a wired mouse, and of course, the monitor. Lovely jubbly. Oh yeah, and the PC. How on earth could I possibly forget that stage? The motherboard is already lit up, so we can go ahead. We're just going to use the power button on the motherboard rather than the front panel one for now to see what happens. Okay, we've got some RGB. Fans are spinning. I'm not sure the front one front one spinning?
No.
No, the front ones aren't spinning. I think they're not quite wired up properly, but the back one is. Okay, we've got some RGB wiring to mess about with, but we're not a million miles away. Well, hey, we got marginally interrupted. I've come back, and the monitor's like, yes, I'm going to work. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to celebrate. Nice. So if we jump into the BIOS, F1, tidy. Now, Dan, what the viewers at home don't know is this is not actually screwed together. So that could have very nearly been a wahey. A wahey and a oh And then if we jump into the BIOS, you'll see we've got a few things going on. We can go ahead and enable XMP for the memory to get that running at the right speed. Two 16 gig DIMMs. We've got our i9 13900K on our ROG Maximus Z790 Hero. Only thing really we need to do is use a little bit of the AI OC tool. Let's hit enable. This will enable AI optimization for your CPU frequency. This sounds like cheating and I like it. All that's left to do then really is install Windows, which we can do with a bootable USB. A full guide on how to do this is over on our website. Then we can dive in and see how well it performs. Before looking at detailed benchmarks though of the 13900K, you guys want to know how this thing actually looks when all the RGB is configured in software and when the whole thing is looking superb. So I'll see you in just a few moments, but first it's time for a customary GeekaWhat montage. Oh yes.
The 13th gen Intel processors.
It's time to see how well this system actually performs and whether the new i9 is actually a worthy upgrade. Spoiler alert, this chip is insane. Let's look at the CPU specific benchmarks and roll through to the gaming ones as we go. Taking a look at Cinebench R23, and the i9 13900K comes out on top by a hefty margin. We're talking 4,500 points more than AMD's new Ryzen 9 7950X, a chip that costs $50 more than this one, and a whopping 12,000 more. That's nearly a 50% increase over the last gen i9 12900K. Move over to single threaded numbers, and Intel once again retain their reputation of being single thread kings. Single thread, of course, is the most important for gaming. The i9 13900K once again beats out the Ryzen 9 7950X, only by around 5%, but it's still a decisive win, and tops the last generation i9 12900K by around 300 points, or around about 20%. Moving on to the 3D Mark CPU profile test, and the results speak for themselves. Even the single thread core was faster than any other processor we've tested. The multi-core score topped the charts. This thing delivers on every front. Something once again demonstrated in our final two synthetic benchmarks, 3D Mark's Time Spy Extreme for DX12 testing, and 3D Mark's Firestrike Standard for DX11. Our DX12 results were great. The i9 topped the charts when testing with a 6950 XT, as we did with all the CPUs to keep the charts fair, and the results in 3D Mark's Firestrike were once again the same, with an even higher margin here over the next best CPU. A chip then that looks like it's going to match up the 4090 very well indeed, and in our results today, that's exactly what happened. We started off with Overwatch 2. We'll ease the build in with an easier but still a brand new title, and here at 4K using true 4K, so no render scaling, I achieved 304 frames per second on average. As a reference point, this gave us a higher frame rate than what we saw when testing with the Ryzen 9 7900 or 7950X, and the game looked buttery smooth as you'd come to expect. In Formula 1 2022, when testing using the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode, the results were once again very good. 4K, ultra high preset, we got 237 FPS on average. The game looked absolutely stunning, and our i9 made sure we didn't see a CPU bottleneck here, something we have previously seen across the board with our 4090 testing. Battlefield 2042 at 4K, and the results were once again very good. 4K, high settings, 122 FPS on average. Strong 90 and 99th percentile results, and as always, our frame rate data was tested with both MSI Afterburner's Riva Tuner and Nvidia FrameView. Moving on to Apex Legends at 1080p, high settings. Here we pulled in 300 FPS on average, which by my records at 1080p is our highest Apex frame rate ever recorded. The good results carried on through to 4K, where the frame rate loss was pretty minimal, 239 on average. This was 37 FPS more than with a comparable Ryzen 9 chip and an RTX 4090, and once again sits as the best gaming result we've ever achieved in Apex Legends. It was a similarly positive story in Fortnite, where at 1080p competitive settings, 1080p of course really testing whether the CPU is going to create a bottleneck, and we achieved over 300 frames per second here. 300 FPS on average with this i9 and 4090 combo. Finally, in Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered, at 4K high settings with DLSS once again enabled, it makes sense to use DLSS and the new DLSS 3 on this build wherever possible, and here we achieved 200 frames per second on average when testing at that 4K high preset. Of course, with this build, all of our results were captured with the 4090 graphics card, so you can see how the system performs, but we did run general benchmarks using a 6950 XT and all the different CPUs we have available. You can learn more about those controlled results over on our website, and I'll link reviews to the new i5, i7 and i9 chips down below. Have Intel reclaimed their crown of the top CPU performance after just 3 weeks away from the fold? Yes, they have. 13th gen is an impressive architecture that still supports DDR4, costs less money to get up and running than Ryzen 7000, and does so with efficient thermals and good TDPs. You can learn more about the new Intel chips and all the parts mentioned in today's build down below. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, we'll see you in the next one for more PC building fun. Or at least, that's what I call it.